I wait patiently at the Paragon for the cars to pass. Coming up the hill or going down it, they all look stressed, in a hurry to get somewhere before time runs out. Feeling a little sorry for them, and more than a little sanctimonious, as a man who's moved on from the motorcar, I saunter across the road and head towards the deli to pick up a loaf of bread. Dzień dobry, jak się masz? I say confidently to the Polish lady behind the counter. Oh, you speak Polish, she replies. Just a little, I say, quickly switching back to English to disguise the fact that I don't really know any Polish. How do you say, may I have a loaf of bread, please? When she tells me, I don't even bother trying to repeat it, never mind remember it. And instead, for reasons I can't explain, I say, how do you say I love you? The woman looks at me rather awkwardly. I don't really mean I love you, obviously. I know you're married. I've seen you pick up your kids from school, I add, going a little red. At this, her eyes widen like a frightened doe, and she looks like she might bolt out of the shop if I weren't blocking her way. Instead, she puts the bread in a brown paper bag, which then splits, probably because her hands are shaking, and she says, £4.95 please, in English this time. I get my card out of my wallet and tap it on the machine, thinking, that's quite a lot for a loaf of bread. Dziękuję, thank you, I mutter, nearly forgetting my bread on the way out. I'm still thinking how I should probably buy bread from somewhere else next time, even though that's by far the best bread in town. And I like the lady. It's just me I'm uncomfortable with. When I suddenly find myself outside the Erotic photography exhibition. It's a small space, obviously a pop-up, and I can see the proprietor, well, probably the artist in fact, talking to a middle-aged man, and I think it's best to wait for him to leave. It's still COVID. So I go and sit on the wall opposite and dig around in my bag for my lapel mic. That way I can say that I'm making a program about artists for the recently launched Ramsgate Radio, and I won't have to admit that I'm just there to look at sexy pictures. The door opens and the man leaves, and I think, well, this is your chance, mate. I stride across the road and go in. Hi, I'm making a program for Ramsgate Radio, and I'd like to talk to some local artists, and I was wondering if you might like to say a few words. I say to her, half shouting through nervousness. The artist is an elegant lady, not as old as me, but that's not saying much. She's wearing red and has a large fur hat, and she's quite attractive. Her eyes are big, shimmering pools of black, and I find myself being sucked into them, like in the title sequence of a Hitchcock film. But I needn't feel awkward. She's really very sweet, and when I realise my phone has stopped recording and have to start again from hello, I'm making a radio program, which actually happens twice, she is completely cool and very professional and doesn't make me feel bad. In fact, we get on well, and we probably have a lot in common. We both moved to Ramsgate about 4 years ago, after getting to the point when we were sick of the city, and we agree that Ramsgate is a place where you can be yourself. I ask her about her pictures, which are definitely erotic, and she tells me what they signify. She's not trying to sell me one, which is a relief, because even at £95 each, I couldn't afford one. And she keeps using the word pleasure a lot. Are you talking about masturbation, I ask. Yes, she replies, without a hint of embarrassment. And then for some reason, I tell her that I've been taking zinc supplements, which is another way of saying I've been wanking too much. She doesn't bat an eyelid, and instead suggests I might try tantric sex next time. Well, this is going well, I think to myself. And at that moment, I see she's only wearing black lingerie, and I'm tying her hands behind her back, about to fuck her in the shop window in De Walden, and that does make me blush a little under my mask. I don't share that image with her, although I get the feeling that she wouldn't have minded. It was a fantasy after all, and not a physical act. But when I told my girlfriend about it a day later on the phone, I missed out that particular detail. What it is to be a man, and somehow every time you meet a woman, you don't even have to be attracted to them, you just imagine fucking them. Not unlike the male rock pigeons, perhaps, that follow the females around, feathers erect and cooing, no doubt thinking the same. Suddenly feeling a sense of shame, I can hear my girlfriend telling me that I'm a misogynist and that I objectify women, and I don't realise how privileged I am as a middle-aged, middle-class, white patriarchal. For some reason it makes me think about my mother, who also used to tell me how lucky I was. She was not a warm person, never a bedtime story or a birthday cake or anything like that. Later as a young man I tried to hug her on one occasion, and she went all stiff and awkward. When my dad went away, I was just left with my mum and my sisters. So I'm used to being with women. And my sister, the one a year older than me, got all of my dad's attention when he was around. And she was very competitive and sometimes cruel. I haven't spoken to her in 10 years now. Not since Mother's funeral, when she ran off with all Mum's things and told everyone that I had. I wonder if I do have a fucked up relationship with women. At that moment, another middle-aged man pops his head around the door and hands my new friend a cup of coffee. Judging by her response, I got the impression that this is a regular occurrence. Well, it's not surprising she has so many middle-aged male admirers, but I can't help wondering if she suggested that they too should take up tantric sex. The thought makes me look at my watch. Fuck, I say out loud. I'm supposed to be meeting someone about a dog, which, as it happens, is true, and I hurriedly unclip the mic from her scarf and take the iPhone from her pocket. I glance at it and see there are several messages from the dog owner. I enjoyed meeting the erotic photographer, but I'll see her again. Perhaps we'll become friends. I raced back up the street towards the West Cliff, where I've arranged to meet the lady about the dog. I'd recently uploaded my profile onto a dog-sitting website. Now my dog is buried in the garden, I thought it might be nice to look after a live dog for a change. Working from home, if you can call writing working, because it's actually more like torture, it can be nice having a dog around, and it would bring in a little bit of money towards the groceries. And being able to travel without the worry of finding someone to look after the dog is more than welcome, even though travelling is now apparently a thing of the past. I run up past the Abbey, and as I turn the corner at the Grange, I can see the lady waiting impatiently with the dog. The wind has whipped up by now, and it's started to drizzle. Anyway, she's seen me running, so I'm assuming that will reassure her that I'm not completely unreliable. We make our introductions, and I make my excuses, and the dog doesn't mind either way. He's what I would call an American Staffordshire Bull Terrier, or what they call in the States a pit bull. But I've had experience of this breed before, and by and large they're very sweet, and very good with children, in spite of all the sensationalism in the tabloids. My own dog was a Staffy, and used to get all sorts of prejudice, even though the breed is recommended by the Kennel Club as great with kids. We take a walk along the cliff, and I get the rundown on the dog. He's a rescue, and a lovely little boy, although he does fight with other dogs, and has some peculiar habits, like literally eating his dog bowl. Okay, so he's a bit fucked up, but I can relate to that, and I don't mind a bit of a challenge. I find dogs, even the damaged ones, a lot easier to deal with than humans, and they can be just as manipulative, especially the bitches. Oh, that didn't come out right. But they don't judge you, whatever they do. The lady says she'd prefer not to go through the website, but I tell her it's probably better because they have some kind of insurance cover, and in any case, I don't fancy getting sued for losing someone's dog, or it eating someone's baby's face off, or any of the myriad things that could possibly go wrong according to my level of conjecture. But I'm saved by the rain, and we abandon our walk and say our goodbyes. I get back to the house and hang up my towel and trunks to dry, which strangely never do, and then I wander around the house for a while wondering what to do next. I have this thing whereby I can't sit down and relax and do nothing, not even to read a book or a newspaper. I have to be occupied with something or other, preferably with my hands, like fixing something, or even just playing a few chords on the guitar, and I mean a few chords. Then I go into the kitchen. I have to put the radio on while I make a cup of tea or get something to eat. I find it difficult to be left just with my thoughts. And even when I'm doing something, a voice comes into my head and says I should be doing something else, and I'm compelled to do it, even if I don't want to. Like I have to get out of bed at 11 p.m. and go and make something to eat, even though I'm not in the slightest bit hungry. I've known about this condition since I was a child, and I mentioned it to my doctor recently. He's a Tamil from Sri Lanka. A small man with a round face, and when something amuses him, he kind of chuckles inside, which makes his eyes shine. But at the same time, he's very professional, and really quite serious. Anyway, I look forward to seeing him. The short interaction with him being as therapeutic as any drug he might prescribe. He referred me for a consultation for ADHD with a psychiatrist, and it turned out I have it, which is why I find it difficult to concentrate. It's a childhood disease, I'm told, caused by a number of things, including your mother smoking while pregnant, and not being breastfed, and generally not bonding with the baby. When I Google it, I discover that it gets more complicated. This chap called Harlow conducted experiments in the late 50s where infant rhesus monkeys were taken away from their mothers and raised in a laboratory setting, with some infants placed in separate cages away from their peers. In social isolation, the monkeys showed disturbed behaviour, staring blankly, circling their cages and engaging in self-mutilation. When the isolated infants were reintroduced to the group, they were unsure how to interact. Many stayed separate from the group. Some were bullied or set upon by others, and some even died after refusing to eat. Well, I do all of those things, I think to myself, apart from the not eating bit and dying. And all in all, it takes me back to my life at prep school. Harlow took infant monkeys from their biological mothers and gave them to two surrogate mothers. One was a doll made of wire and wood, and the second was covered in foam rubber and soft cloth. Even without complete isolation, the infant monkeys raised without mothers developed social defects, showing reclusive tendencies and clinging to their cloth diapers. Harlow was interested in the infant's attachment to the cloth diapers, speculating that the soft material simulated the comfort provided by a mother's touch. In the 50s and 60s, psychological research in the United States at least was dominated by behaviourists and psychoanalysts who supported the view that babies became attached to their mothers because they provided food. Harlow and other social and cognitive psychologists argued that this perspective overlooked the importance of comfort, companionship, and love in promoting healthy development. Clearly, the 1950s and 60s were a dangerous time for humanity and for monkeys. All things considered, I got off rather lightly. My sisters are both damaged, although I don't think they had it as bad as me. I mean in the way that we were treated by our parents. Mum was obsessed with my eldest sister, probably because she had left her father, who had become aggressive when it turned out he had a tumour growing in his brain. My own dad was obsessed with my other sister. I don't know why, perhaps because she was his firstborn. As a lower middle class family, we were amongst the first to holiday in Spain. While my parents drank and smoked, we kids spent our time in the pool. And one day my dad was watching my sister and remarking what a terrific swimmer she was. And I said, "I bet I can beat her." And he scoffed and said, "All right, let's have a race, and then we'll see who's best." Now this seems a bit silly now, but at the time, for me at least, it was a big deal. I'd always been ignored by my father, while he doted on my sister all the time, and I was pretty sure I could swim faster than her. And I naturally thought if I beat her, then my dad would love me as much as he did her. So we line up, and by now everyone is watching, even the waiters, and my dad said, "Ready, steady, go," or whatever it was, and we take off into the water. I don't remember how many lengths it was, but anyway, I won, quite easily in fact, and I proudly went up to my father, water dripping off me and panting a little, expecting to be congratulated, and he said, "Yes, but your sister's style is so much better than yours." And in that moment, I think I realised that I couldn't ever win, in sport or in life. She would often tell my parents I'd done something which wasn't true. I noticed that both my sisters are good at blaming people for problems in their own lives, and whilst I acknowledge that my upbringing and the lack of support and encouragement and love has damaged me, I don't blame my parents. In a way, I feel sorry for them, not in a patronising way, but to see that they too must have suffered and been affected by their own childhood experiences. Dad being from a Glasgow slum, and Mum being swaddled in ermine and pearls. I have no doubt that the spiritual practice has saved me. The Tai Chi and meditation and cold water swimming, which is known to alleviate depression. I probably won't take the ADHD medication, because it's speed basically, otherwise known as amphetamines, and I know what they're like because I used to take them when I was a teenager. But it's good to have a diagnosis, so that way you have a choice to do something about it or not. Okay, so you may be picking up on my thinking being a little out of focus, but that's my point. I have attention deficit. Now this is a generalisation obviously, but I think I'm right in saying that on the whole the Polish tradesmen, who have become such a presence in this country, do actually turn up and do a pretty good job, and don't overcharge you, and are generally fairly pleasant about it. Of course the tradesmen of Kent might not agree, and perhaps see them as a threat to their livelihood. I had a new boiler installed recently. The old one blew up when I was away in New York. I had lodgers in the house, so I had to get it repaired. I think it took me into overdraft, at least until I sold my motorbike. Anyway, on my return, the guy turns up. This is an English tradesman. I don't remember his name, otherwise I would name him, even though I'm not naming anyone in this book. He's in such a hurry. He wants to get the boiler installed in record time. I mean, he's working hard, but he's like dropping his screwdriver and looking really stressed. And I'm wondering why he's in such a hurry. Perhaps he's got an unrealistic workload, or he needs extra so his kid can fly to America for a cancer operation. I don't know. But anyway, he can't wait to get out of there. And guess what? I have to get him back 3 times because the thermostat isn't working or the water pressure is dropping or whatever it is. And every time he came back, he was sullen and it was always someone else's fault. And I finally worked out that he just wanted to get the job done as soon as possible and get home and put the telly on and put his feet up or whatever else he does when he gets home. And there's an unmistakable sense of entitlement. The idea of coming to someone's house and doing a really good job and having some human interaction with the customer was of absolutely no interest to him whatsoever. He wouldn't even lend me the keys so I could bleed the radiators, which really should have been his job. Perhaps he thinks he's done nothing wrong and that I'm just a difficult customer. In fact, he definitely thinks that. Is this something new? I wonder if the tradesman who built my little house in 1720 didn't give a shit. I kind of doubt it because the house has lasted for 300 years. So what's changed? Maybe that's it. Everything is changing so quickly these days, and we want it all. And we want it now. I get an invitation to join a neighbourhood group online, and I think maybe I'll join, rather than being stuck in the house all day with my head. Mostly it's people complaining about one another's comments, but there's an advert for a window cleaner. That's someone who needs one rather than someone who cleans windows. And I think, why not? I need some physical exercise, and I need to do something for someone else for a change. I'm not going to ask for any money. It's probably someone elderly who can't reach the windows and hasn't seen a soul in months. So I message him and get the address. Jump on my bike with my bucket over my handlebars, with a cloth and sponge, and cycle up to Newington and find the house. I couldn't miss it because it's the only one in the street completely covered in dirt. Not just the windows, but all of it. The brickwork, the woodwork, everything. I ring on the bell, and a man who looks like he's in his 60s, but's probably in his 40s, answers. He doesn't look well. He's sweating and wheezing, and his trousers are falling down. He shows me the front of the house, which I've already seen, and ask him if he has a ladder. He doesn't. Any hot water? I ask him. And I follow him into the house and fill my bucket and try not to trip over the debris that's strewn all over the floor. The house inside is as dirty as out, and there's a smell of old food and God knows what else. I'm guessing this man lives on his own and perhaps needs some company. But he doesn't want to chat, and I go outside to start the Herculaneum task of making the windows see-through again. I'm balancing on the sill trying to wash with one hand and gripping onto the brickwork with the other, and managing to get more water on me than the windows, when the neighbour comes out to see what's happening. His house is clean, and he also looks neat in his sportswear and trimmed hair. It's quite dirty, he remarks, and as he goes back into his house, I wonder if he knows his neighbour, or even speaks to him. But I don't judge him for it. It's difficult looking after someone who can't look after themselves. After an hour or so, I can't do any more. The upstairs windows are out of reach, and I'm soaking wet. But I have no regrets. How much do I owe you? The man says. Nothing, I reply, congratulating myself, and I can tell he's relieved. Sorry I couldn't reach the top ones, I say with a little more humility. No problem, thanks very much, he replies. Thanks very much. And I head off on my bike, my wet shoes slipping off the pedals, happy that for a couple of hours at least, I didn't have to think about myself. When I get home, I struggle out of my wet clothes and leave them in a pile on the floor to remind me that I've achieved something today. I check my emails, and lo and behold, someone else needs a window cleaner. A lady this time, who lives on the West Cliff, and judging by her address, it's next to Pugin's house. I message her. I don't have a ladder, I tell her. I don't think you'll need one, I'm on the ground floor. How much do you charge? She asks. Nothing, I reply with some pride. I do it for free. I never heard from her again. Well, everybody I know loves to demonise Margaret Thatcher. And Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, for that matter, seem to me represented the era of the right of the individual. The right to earn your own crust and not pay it all back in taxes. The right to own your own home. The right to say, I'm all right, Jack, and fuck everybody else. Although they didn't actually say that, at least not on television. Well, I know this is a pretty simplistic view of the conservative values of the time, of the neoliberal economics of that era. But I think it eventually seeped into the consciousness of the working classes as well. And I use the word seep because it's literally like a sewage pipe with a crack in it. Not that we have a working class anymore. It's just the rich and the poor, and the divide is getting bigger every day. The workers, who, let's face it, had an absolutely awful time being exploited by the capitalist bosses in the 19th and first half of the 20th century, now wish to consume. They want widescreen TVs, American refrigerators, new cars, cheap clothes, and holidays in the sun. And why wouldn't they? They've been promised all of those things, and they see them as symbols of their freedom. But in reality, it's just controlled by another name. In our last election, those ex-Labour voters in the north voted for Boris Johnson, and when asked why, many of them said it's because they thought he had a sense of humour. Let's face it, if Boris Johnson, or Donald Trump for that matter, hadn't been television celebrities, neither of them would have got elected. I wish I could find that clip of Ian Hislop on Have I Got News For You, saying Boris should be Prime Minister, like it was a joke. Well, it is a joke, but it's on us. I wonder if my heating engineer voted Conservative. I bet he did. We're not clear of the pandemic yet. I know I don't talk about it much, because I don't want it to swamp what's really going on, and was going on before COVID got jiggy with it. People are still dying in spite of the vaccine. One of my friends in New York caught COVID because his office pressurised him to get back to work. And before he died, he gave it to his mother and father-in-law, and they both died. So don't think that I don't care, because I do. But I also think it's possible that some good things will come out of this disaster. Hopefully, some things will actually change. The idea of things going back to normal horrifies me. It makes me cringe when people say that. I would rather see it as an opportunity. The ancient Chinese word for disaster and opportunity is the same. It's not just COVID that's the enemy. It's that at this stage in human evolution, not only are we wrecking the environment, but we're not even happy. We can't even be kind to one another. I mean, before COVID, other than Trump and Boris Johnson, sorry, I can't just call him Boris. It sounds silly, and he's not my mate. The media was full of news about the environment, about petrol and diesel cars being phased out by 2030, about the ice caps melting and how marine life is being destroyed by plastic. And since COVID, it's all about looking after humanity and our old people and getting our children back to school. But humanity has caused this pandemic, if not by some economic or political conspiracy, then by a lab accident, or because mankind and animals are in such close proximity that infections can easily pass between the species. But I don't really buy that one. Certainly by the world being too overpopulated, and with jet aeroplanes flying around everywhere. And our fear of death, because one guarantee we all share in life is that we're going to die. And in my opinion, it's silly to be afraid of that. After all, no one can tell us what it's like. And even our governments happily kill people over some stupid land dispute, which is silly because you can't actually own land, or its natural resources, or anything else for that matter. That's one of the reasons the Native Americans lost their land so easily, because President Jackson, who ironically was the first Democrat president, and whose statue I saw outside the White House when I attended a Black Lives Matter march last summer, used genocide, because the indigenous people didn't understand what the treaties meant. They'd just been wandering around in the changing seasons, following the buffalo or planting maize. I don't know how I got onto that, but I can tell you that Grey Owl came from Hastings. Anyway, back to Ramsgate, which has been bombed by the Nazis, 500 of them in 5 minutes. People are rushing for the tunnels, literally shitting themselves. Children killed going to school, and the mutilated bodies of old people who couldn't get to the shelters in time are being pulled out of the rubble. Virtually any bomber returning from London, or one of the other targets like RAF Manson, will drop their unspent bombs on Ramsgate. Rather than relying on evacuation, the mayor of Ramsgate lobbied the government to allow him to commission a network of deep tunnels under the town. It wasn't scaremongering. Only 20 years earlier, there were Zeppelin dropping bombs and long-range guns pounding the Thanet coast. How quickly we've forgotten the horrors of war, of man's inhumanity to man. Now it's all widescreen TVs in a second car, and people get upset when they crack the screen on their iPhone. If you ask people in this country what the war was about, they would probably say it was about freedom. Freedom from tyranny, freedom from the fascists. But what did we do with that freedom? Apart from the sacrifice of our servicemen and the innocent civilians who died, the war completely bankrupted the country, and the population was traumatised. But loss also produces opportunity, and eventually, out of the devastation came hope and a vision for the future, and there was a sense of altruism. And Clement Attlee, who was a Labour politician, did something completely unthinkable. He introduced free healthcare for everyone. Before that, if you got sick and couldn't afford to see a doctor, you either got more sick or you died. He created the NHS that we take completely for granted today. Then, by the 1960s, jobs were fairly easy to come by, and people had more money in their pockets. But that wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been the deprivation caused by the war. Look what happened to Japan and Germany after the Second World War. They grew the biggest economies in the world next to the US, who had always seen the war as a business opportunity. But as people became wealthier, everyone wanted more, and the government encouraged it. From Harold Macmillan's "We've never had it so good" to Thatcher and Reagan with their free market economy. And that era was when some terrible crimes were committed against Ramsgate that were just as destructive as the Nazi bombs. The pulling down of the so-called slums, including half of my street, Paradise, and half of St Lawrence High Street for road widening. Our neoclassical town hall, an outdoor market, almost all of the theatres, the neoclassical building that was Barclays Bank, the Convent of the Assumption, Eastcliff Lodge, the classic Odeon Cinema, Bourne's department store, Hotel Casablanca, Cliff's End Hall, St George's School, the Marina swimming pool, Elizabeth Fry's house. I mean, how could anyone want to pull down Elizabeth Fry's house? Well, she was only a woman, I suppose. But she almost single-handedly transformed not only the prison system in this country, but was also the champion of mental health, of homelessness and nursing. And not forgetting the War Memorial on the West Cliff being replaced by public convenience. But somehow in that second half of the 20th century, something happened to people's values, where people's sense of lack was met by an insatiable hunger to destroy. When I was a kid, which was in the 1960s, I used to smash my toys, and thinking about it now, I think I did it to take revenge on my parents, because I knew that they didn't really love me, or didn't know how. So was the demolition of old Ramsgate also a form of revenge? Revenge against the class system, perhaps? Revenge against the inequalities of the past, represented by those ostentatious-looking Victorian buildings? Revenge against being cold and hungry, and to know your place? Or perhaps it was the pull of the American dream, the supermarkets, the big cars, and the right to consume 7,000 chickens, the right to have more and more and more. But it's not for me to judge. I'm not saying I understand it, and as a rule I stay away from politics. I didn't vote for Brexit. I don't like politics, because by its very nature it's almost impossible to cut through all the bullshit. I didn't vote because I didn't believe there was any chance of leaving Europe. But how wrong I was. I voted for Tony Blair, but that turned out to be a mistake, not being a fan of war, or of spin for that matter. And against my better judgment, I voted for Jeremy Corbyn, mainly under pressure from my left-wing girlfriend, who incidentally owns 2 properties in New York and has a substantial stock market portfolio. I accused her of being a champagne socialist once, and she corrected me and said she was more like a Prosecco socialist. I wouldn't ordinarily have voted for someone who represented a militant socialist view outdated by the 1970s, but I also suspected that Boris Johnson wasn't just a funny man either. There's no doubt that the political party system, in local as well as in national government, creates divisions and produces blinkered policies. I don't see why what's best for the town has to be a political issue. If you look at Ramsgate, it's a beautiful town. It nestles in a gap in the White Cliffs, with beautiful beaches. There's an abundance of historic buildings, a quite spectacular harbour. It's affordable to live here, and now things are changing and it's going through a period of regeneration. Then how can we all encourage that? Surely not by industrialising the port, whether it's a cement factory, a waste incinerator, or a ferry port. I met with one of the Ramsgate Council representatives to Kent County Council recently. They're responsible for the big stuff, including the roads. This is someone who clearly cares about the town, and wants to see ordinary people have a better quality of life and see money in their pockets, was a phrase she used. And when we were trying to cross the road on the Paragon, which wasn't easy because of the traffic speeding around the corner, she said, "And we need another zebra crossing here, but there just isn't the money in the budget." And I said, why don't we just get rid of the cars? I mean, by 2030, petrol and diesel cars are being phased out. Then don't we need to start reducing the number of cars right now? Cities all over the UK are already doing it, like Manchester and York, which I read recently expects to see a car-free city by 2023. Durham was doing it years ago, and it happened in the Netherlands 60 years ago, which was the time when we were smashing through our towns and cities to create car access. The argument against this is that there'll be less people around to spend their money, but in fact the cost of cars to Ramsgate has been devastating. Hardly any of those cars driving between the West and East Cliffs are stopping in the town. They're just getting a good view. Can we not reduce the number of cars in Ramsgate, at least by a third, and introducing a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and making the centre of town a car-free zone? Isn't the cost of cars to the town too great just for the personal convenience of getting around? What would happen if we actually got rid of them? People would walk. Politicians are often heard saying that electric cars should be cheaper, so more people will buy them. But surely the plan is not to replace all the petrol cars with electric ones, because the roads will still be full of cars with all the problems that come with them. You think drivers will stop being impatient just because they're driving an electric car? And even driverless cars are still cars. More efficient and greener and cleaner and quieter public transport is vital. Seeing empty buses pumping out all that diesel smoke makes me want to weep. It wasn't very long ago the government were telling everybody to buy diesel. Could their experts not see the black smoke or something? And because they think it will please the electorate, the government have announced that they're increasing bus services. But if that means adding more buses to the loop in Thanet, then I would rather crawl to Margate on my hands and knees. Okay, so the buses may soon be electric, but that probably increases the likelihood of getting run over by one. The old tram system that united the three Thanet towns seems like a modern idea by comparison, and would be a draw to visitors today. Perhaps the school kids could get them instead of having their mothers dropping them off and picking them up, creating traffic jams, emissions and stress. There's one mother who drives down my street, Paradise, which is a single-track road at what must be 40 miles an hour every morning at 8 a.m, and then parks in a disabled spot outside the nursery school. It's reckless, and I would report her, but actually I feel sorry for her. She's probably working as well as being a mum, and I bet you she goes to the gym. My God, the pressures we are under in this culture to be busy. In spite of what we've been told by the corporations and by government, it's not what we have more of or what gains we make in terms of wealth and technology, but rather how we see the world that will improve our quality of life, that will determine our future happiness, and ultimately the survival of mankind. Ramsgate's economy currently runs on tourism, fishing and wind farm technology. Doesn't that place us in a pole position to becoming a model town in the UK in the 21st century? Because if we don't achieve that vision in the next decade or so, all of the doomed predictions will come true.